So now that it looks like Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia at least, has actually arrived at a certain agreement with other Democrats in the U.S. Senate and the Biden administration about this climate plan that they're using to tackle climate change, as well as sundry other problems facing American society, I think it's time to revisit a narrative that we've been hearing for at least the past year or so. One of the commentators I find most entertaining, and of whom I am a fan, Charlemagne the God, appeared on ABC's The View and said, who's actually running the country? Is it President Joe Manchin or President Biden?
I heard that you asked Vice President Harris, who's the real president here, Biden or Manchin? Did you ask her that question? What did she say?
Nothing. she didn't really give an answer. But I mean, as you can see, it still seems like President Manchin is currently running this country. And I think that was, in hindsight, when you look, people thought I was being harsh by asking that question. But now it's like, well, damn, who is running this country? Is it President Biden or President Joe Manchin?
He has a lot of power for one person. That's
Absolutely.
True.
This is, of course, because of basically the ability of two Democratic senators primarily, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, to stymie a lot of the more radical changes that much of the rest of the Democratic Party has wanted to introduce in American society through federal legislation. First of all, Joe Manchin, this whole idea that he's somehow a dino, a Democrat in name only, D-I-N-O, is a very misguided notion, if not complete nonsense. It's true that he's more moderate than where the Democratic Party is right now as a whole, or even where it was a few years ago, but that's because he comes from West Virginia, a conservative-leaning state. He doesn't represent the whole country. He represents West Virginia. Those are the voters, the only voters, who determine how long he keeps his seat in the Senate. So don't be surprised if the way he votes is not always in concert with the way other Democrats in the rest of the country want him to vote. Same thing goes for Kyrsten Sinema. She represents Arizona, for Pete's sake. This is the state that gave the country Barry Goldwater and later John McCain. Only in the last few years has it started to trend somewhat more Democratic than it used to be. And it's still not a deep blue state by any means. A purple state maybe, arguably, but not deep blue by any means. So you shouldn't be shocked to see that it's produced a Democratic senator who turns out to be more moderate than the Democratic Party norm nowadays. As for why they have so much influence, this is something that really should be a lot more obvious to people than for some reason it is. Look at the results of the 2020 election. The Democrats only managed to eke out 50 seats in the Senate out of a total of 100 seats. We've heard a lot of talk in the media about the Democrats' narrow Senate majority. Hello? Can people not count anymore?
Did you go to school?
Since when is 50 seats out of 100 a majority? It's half the seats in the Senate, not a majority. Ain't no Democratic majority right now, ain't no Republican majority for that matter. There is no Senate majority these days. 50 seats out of 100 is not a majority. Now I get why they call it one. It's because since Joe Biden won the election in 2020, his vice president, Kamala Harris, gets to step in and cast tie-breaking votes in the Senate. But that's only when there is a tie vote to break. And that is a much bigger if than a lot of Democrats seem to want to admit or acknowledge. And let's not forget, the Democrats were lucky to win even that many seats in the Senate. 2 of those seats are the seats from Georgia that the Democrats won in those upset victories in the Georgia runoff races in January 2021. And let's not forget, they won those races. Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, the 2 Democratic senators from Georgia right now, they won those races by narrow margins. Let's not also forget that one of the reasons they won those seats appears to be because Donald Trump, with his big mouth, ran his big mouth and spread his bogus big lie about the 2020 election supposedly having been rigged and stolen. So what happened? A number of Georgia Republican voters threw up their hands, or I guess you could say they sat on their hands, and they said, hey, the president himself says the game is rigged, the fix is in, so what's the point of turning out to vote? So just enough of them seem to have stayed home on runoff election day in early January 2021 to give the Democrats those 2 Senate seats. But a little again, maybe a few tens of thousands of votes the other way, tops, and the Democrats wouldn't even have won those 2 seats. The Republicans would probably have hung on to at least one of those seats, maybe even both of them. And then there wouldn't be any talk of any Democratic majority in the Senate at all. The other thing to remember is that in November 2020, the Democrats lost a few seats in the House, and so now they have a relatively narrow House majority. So what's the overall outcome of the 2020 election, the Democrats beat Trump, thank God, at the presidential level, though not by as large a margin as I think they could and should have. They barely managed to eke out a mere 50 seats in the Senate, and they only hung on to a relatively narrow majority in the House of Representatives. What aspect of that makes you think that they have what it takes to bring about fundamental, radical, transformational change in American society? Just a study of American politics at the congressional as well as the presidential level during the 21st century so far, just a cursory examination of that history should tell any intelligent observer that these just aren't the kind of conditions in which radical change can be achieved. As polarized as the country is right now, especially in Washington, Democrats versus Republicans, as narrowly divided as it is, and as much as the partisan pendulum keeps swinging back and forth, you're just not going to get transformational change, radical change, when your party only wins a modest presidential election victory, ekes out only half the seats in the Senate, and has only a narrow majority in the House of Representatives.
What this should signal is that Trump personally is unpopular in America. But Republican ideas, Republican solutions, Republicanism outside of Donald Trump still has a lot of popularity. So that's why you saw the mixed results that you did, where Biden won the presidency decisively and convincingly, but you had a lot of down ballot races that went for Republicans. So America, we are not a liberal progressive country. We are not a people's revolutionary republic. Likewise, we are not a dyed-in-the-wool conservative country either. America is a moderate country, and I think that this election is a perfect illustration of that. We don't really like extremes.